Okay, so this is the next section. It says, find the solutions of the following using completing the square and or the square root properties. So I'm going to start with number 21 on your review. I have 3x squared plus 15 equals 0. So the easiest thing I'm going to do, guys, is I have two terms and I have an x squared. So I'm going to do the square root method. I'm going to move this guy over. So I get 3x squared equals negative 15. Right now, I already know I'm going to be in imaginary land because I have an x squared equals a negative number. Before I can take the square root, I have to divide both sides by 3. So I get x squared equals 15 divided by 3 is 5. So I have negative 5. And then I need to take the square root. So the square root of negative 5, I'm going to break this down to be the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 5. Pull that negative out. This guy is I, and the square root of 5 is just the square root of 5. You can't break it down. So it's plus or minus. So I'm going to write plus or minus the square root of 5, but your I is going to come out in front, and then I have a square root of 5. Be careful, because if you write this on the other side, it's going to look like you're adding. This would be considered wrong. This is wrong. Don't do that, because it looks like the square root of 5 plus I, the square root of 5 minus I. We are multiplying here. That's what this dot means. So you put the I and the plus or minus to the front to denote that it's being multiplied. So do not do this. You will get it wrong on your test. Alright, so let's look at number 23. Squeeze them in right here. I have x minus 4 squared plus 5 equals negative 15. You want to get the squared part by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 5. So I get x minus 4 squared equals negative 15 and negative 5 give you negative 20. I'm now going to take the square root of both sides. So I get x minus 4 equals the square root of 20. And then you add 4 to both sides. So I have 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 20. The square root of 20 is plus or minus. I'm going to break down the square root of negative 20. So that's going to break down to be the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 20. The square root of negative 1 is I. And the square root of 20, I can break that down. 2 and 10, 5 and 2. I have a pair of 2's. So this becomes 2 square root of 5. It's not good math manners to have an I in front of a number. So it's going to be 4 plus or minus 2I square root of 5. And that is your final answer. You have two imaginary solutions. Let's look at number 24, guys. Alright, so number 24, I have x squared plus 14x equals 51. Here I'm not going to do the square root method because I have an x squared and an x. What I'm going to do is I'm going to complete the square. So the good thing about it is my number without the variable is already on the right side. So I'm going to go ahead and add my blanks. Now how you take how you do complete the square, guys, is first always make sure there's not a number in front of your x squared. You see it right here? There's a 1, and that's good. That makes the problem a little bit easier. If it was a 2 or 3 or a bigger number, you would have to factor that out. But right now it's a 1, so we're good. So I'm going to take the middle number, divide by 2. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. And then I square it. It's always take the middle number, divide by 2, and then square it. That's the rule on how to complete the square. Divide by 2, and then whatever that number is squared. So 7 squared is 49. 49 times 1 is 49. So I can put that on the other side too. Now, what I want to do is I want to factor this whole guy right here. The easiest way to factor this out is look, what did you just square? So I'm going to write this as x plus 7 squared. And then I have 51 and 49. And so when I add those two numbers, I get 100. So now I can use the square root method to solve. So what I'm going to do is take the square root of both sides. So I get x plus 7 on the left. And the square root of 100 is positive and negative 10, because 10 times 10 is 100. And negative 10 times negative 10 is also positive 100. A negative times a negative is a positive. So the last thing I'm going to do is subtract 7. So I have negative 7 plus or minus 10. Do not, guys, do not leave your answer like this. These are two real numbers. So let's break it up. You have negative 7 plus 10, and you have negative 7 minus 10. So negative 7 plus 10 is positive 3. Negative 7 minus 10 is negative 17. Please make sure you simplify all the way through. And that is your final answer. Last one I'm going to do from this section is number 27. So I have x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals negative 432. So I want to complete the square here as well, but I need to move this 9 over. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and add my blanks. So this becomes negative 432 minus 9. That would give me negative 441 plus blank. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the middle number like the last one, divide by 2, so you get negative 3, be careful, squared, and that gives me positive 9. A lot of you guys forget this step. You don't put a negative right here, which I understand the negative cancels out when you square it, but when you're writing your factored expression, it's always good to look at this number, so don't skip a step. It's negative 3 squared. And then 9 times 1 is 9, so I'm going to write 9 here. I'm going to factor this left section right here, and so that is whatever you squared. So this is going to be x minus 3 squared. On the right side, I have negative 441 plus 9, so that gives me negative 432. So now what I'm going to do is do the square root method. I'm going to take the square root on both sides. So I have square root of negative 432, negative, and then I'm going to add 3. So I have 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 432. I'm going to go ahead and break this up to be the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 432. So the square root of negative 1 is I. 432, I'm going to break that down. Remember, if you're not really sure, just start halving things. So I get 2 and 2, 16. I get 2 and 108. I'm going to circle my prime so I don't lose them. 2 and 54. And I know 54, I'm going to go back here. Oops, 54 is not prime. I know 54 is 9 and 6. So 3 and 2. And 3 and 3. Ah, sorry, I ran out of room with my paper. So let's see, I have a pair of 2's. I have another pair of 2's. So 2 times 2 is 4, and a pair of 3's. So 2 times 2 times 3. 4 times 3 is 12. And then I have a leftover 3. So this will be 12 root 3. Multiplying. Remember, I don't like having 12 and I like that. It's bad math manners, so I'm going to flip it. It's going to be 3 plus or minus 12I root 3. Two imaginary solutions.